Let's talk about Venezuela. Not because, to be honest, I care about Venezuela all that much, but we have the story from the New York Times. Street clashes turn deadly as Venezuela's power struggle deepens. The fatal violence comes as both President Nicolas Maduro and the opposition claim victory in the presidential election. More protests were taking place on Tuesday. What is this, a CVS receipt they're holding up?
Maybe that's the cost of groceries. I'm not trying to actually be funny. That looks
probably the election tab, to be completely honest, but it's just so long, I'd assume. At least 16 people, including a soldier, have died, and about 750 more arrested as a result of protests in Venezuela. Election officials declared the nation's autocratic leader Maduro the winner of another 6-year term early Monday, saying he handily beat former diplomat Edmundo Gonzalez. But the government, didn't you say it was Maria the other day?
I did. The opposition leader, they said, was Maria in the Al Jazeera thing.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's the opposition leader, but I thought it was Gonzalez. Yeah. But the government has not released the full results, and many countries, including the U.S., have said the vote was marred by widespread irregularities. So what we're seeing now is, I don't know if I have any tweets pulled up for this one. Oh, yeah, take a look at this. This is from Visegrad. The streets of Caracas packed to the brim with protesters out to support opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Yeah, that's what you said. During her first major speech since the election. Interesting. Woo. I never know if these things are real, though.
Could be 3 years ago.
Right. And what is the date on this one? They say it's from today, but Alerta Mundial. It says, the streets of Venezuela overflow to protest against Nicolas Maduro's fraud. So what I see here and why I find it interesting is that there's been some articles written about civil war. I think it was like Rolling Stone wrote one. A bunch of them are writing, and you know what? I should probably pull this up because I think people should, it was Rolling Stone, and I think people should see what they're talking about. Not that I'm saying it's all, true and correct or whatever. Let's see if we can get this article pulled up.
Also, after that, pull up the BBC article from 2012 when Venezuela bans private gun ownership, if anybody wants to see what's coming to America under Kamala Harris.
So take a look at Rolling Stone, and here's a quote. This is from, where they said this is George, let's see, Ohio State Senator George Lang was warming up the crowd ahead of a speech from J.D. Vance. Quote, I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. It's the greatest experiment in the history of mankind, and if we come down to a civil war, I'm glad we got people like Bikers for Trump on our side. There's a ... so who knows what he actually said. He later wrote that he regretted the mark, which was made in the excitement of the moment on stage. They go through many different people on the right who have talked about whether we're at war or whether there's a civil war. So the reason I think Venezuela is interesting is what happens when there is, indeterminate election. Or at the very least, the way to describe it is no one accepts the result of an election. We're not Venezuela. Venezuela is much, much smaller than the U.S., and we have hyperpolarization and geographic polarization. As I was saying yesterday, there's no way anybody in West Virginia is going to be like, well, I wanted Trump, so I'm going to go drive to New York or D.C. or Philly. They're going to stay where they are, in which case, why would you see clashes?
Right.
However, that being said, you can take a look at what happens. I'm actually thinking that what's happening in Venezuela is more likely to happen if Trump does win. If Trump wins, then liberals in major cities go nuts and riot and smash, tear down posters and lose their minds.
You remember the failed coup, Operation Gideon in 2020 with Venezuela? And we had the private missionary firm from here, from a guy who started in Canada, became an American citizen, and it failed when they hit land. And then that's another one of those things where you don't know what's real or not, because Maduro said it was the CIA, and then his opposition said it was Maduro. Right, and it looked like it could be him lying to make it just kind of like a Venezuelan Northwoods.
You look at the failure that is Venezuela, and it's funny when the leftists are like, that's because the CIA is doing it to them. It's like, shut up, dude.
It's like everyone knows the CIA does that stuff, so I think Maduro is like, well, we're going to frame America.
But the idea that I was in Venezuela 10 years ago, and I can tell you that everything they try to do doesn't make any sense. The story I use to exemplify this is trying to buy a cell phone. Because they mandate jobs, because jobs are what give people access to currency, it took like 5 to 6 people to buy a cell phone. Whereas in America, you walk into a T-Mobile and you walk up to one guy and say, I want to get that phone. And they go, okay. And they pull their tablet and they start swiping. And can I get your ID? And then here's the phone. And then, okay, you swipe here and then we'll fill this out. And it takes like 15 minutes. You sign it. One guy, you're done. in Venezuela, you go to one guy and say, I'd like to buy a cell phone. He says, okay, fill out this form. Okay, now you're going to go to cell phone acquisition. So that's upstairs and around the corner. Then you go to cell phone acquisition and say, here's a list of phones you can buy. And say, okay, I want this one. He goes, okay, here's your ticket for that phone. Now you're going to go to warehouse retrievals. And then you walk over to one guy and he goes, there's your ticket. Thank you. And he walks in the back. He finds the phone. He brings it back out. He says, okay, now you're going to go to, to purchasing. Then you walk over. And I'm just like, why? And the guy I was with, who was Venezuelan, was like, the government mandates the creation of jobs. So they require all of these companies to have as many jobs as possible. And it doesn't work. It drains the economy. It fails. So this is what Venezuela is. So when you see like this coup stuff and they're like, it's not Maduro. Maduro was on camera giving a speech to his country and he grabs an empanada out of his drawer and eats it. This dude is not competent.